I love that he's praying about compassion. One of the consistent things that I love seeing in the life of Jesus is the compassion that he has for the people, his broken heart for the brokenhearted. And that's what we're talking about today, except we're going to go Old Testament to talk about it. Have you ever been in a situation where you find yourself, you've compromised, and you knew you shouldn't have, but now you're here, and I don't know how to get out? And now I'm too deep. I'm in too deep, and I don't even know that God is capable of using me anymore because of the slippery slope. Like, it was just a small thing at first, but now I've slidden into this mess that I'm in. We've all been in some version of that. And the story we're talking about today is a picture of that. It slides so far that we're talking about the story of Esther. And while you flip to the story of Esther, you can dust off that gilded pages part of your Bible back there. But the word God is never mentioned in the book. There's a book of the Bible where God isn't spoken of. Isn't that bizarre? But he's everywhere. And watching how God in his sovereignty can use broken people to do great things is the compassion of God. It's the same compassion that Jesus shows to the broken people, the tax collector that he calls, the zealot that he calls, the people that he lines up to be his voice for the church. That's the same compassion he shows to these people who have compromised to a point that they're in this position. So, if you're in the book of Esther, we're going to tell a story. The whole book is this one continuing story, and it's fascinating. And so just like when sometimes you start reading a book, you start watching a movie, you think, the first 10 or 15 minutes, you're like, what's going on here? It seems like they keep on introducing new characters and stuff. It's going to feel like that at the beginning, but trust me, there's this wild payoff towards the last half. So keep up with this. But we're in the book of Esther. Just to give you some background on where we've been up to this point with the nation of Israel. Israel is God's chosen people. And he chose them to show off his greatness and his glory through them. Through their brokenness, he's going to choose to use them. Now, their sin caused them to be taken captive. So a whole country was taken captive by Babylon. Babylon was beaten up by Persia, so now they're in Persian control. Esther 1:1. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, some of your Bibles might say Xerxes. It's the same guy. Xerxes is easier to say, but my Bible says Ahasuerus, so we're just going to roll with that. Now in the days of King Ahasuerus, who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. He was the most powerful man in the world. This king of Persia was the most powerful man in the world. He was in control from Ethiopia, northern Africa, to India, Eastern Asia. It's this massive kingdom that he's in charge of. He's a really, really big deal. And he's our first main character. So as we get introduced to him, it's important to know he is an indulgent man. He's a wicked man. And he's going to be a consistent character throughout. So even God is in charge of moving through the hearts of wicked kings. But we start off just understanding his demeanor, okay? If you look at verse 4, he's throwing this feast. While he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for 180 days. This guy's throwing a party for 6 months. It is a 6-month feast. And this is for his military and his nobles. When he gets done with that party, he's going to have a party for the rest of the country that only lasts a week. A week-long party feels like a really long party unless you just finished a 6-month party. And he just finished a 6-month party, and he's throwing a week-long party for everybody else in the kingdom. Now, everybody gets to come to this, and he thinks, hey, you know what we should do? I should show off my beautiful wife. And so he sends one of his servant eunuchs to go talk to his wife and say, hey, Vashti is her name. Vashti, you should come show off how beautiful you are. Put that headdress on that I like and come out and prance around for us. And not surprisingly, she's like, no, I don't want to do that. But you don't say no to the king of Persia. That's not a thing you get to do. And so she's in the middle of throwing a party for all the women, and she has her own thing going on. And, would you, if you were the wife, want to be called out to like the seventh day of a week-long frat party just to show off your beauty? Like, no, she doesn't. And so he can't stand for this, but he's not sure what to do. So he asks his servants, he says, what do we do? Because I don't think she should get away with that. And one of his servants says, you know what we should do? You should not let her be queen anymore, because here's what's going to happen. If she gets away with this, all the women in the kingdom are going to think that they can just say no to their husbands when they want to see how beautiful they are. And we can't be having that. So just like a group of men who think that they can legislate submission, they say, you know what we should do? We should make a law. King, let's pass a law saying that women have to listen to men, because that's going to work. And so they do it anyways, because that's what a group of men do. They high-five each other and they're like, yeah, it's going to be awesome. So then chapter 2 happens. That was chapter 1. That's the introduction to the kind of king that he is. This is why there's no longer a queen anymore, because Vashti got kicked out of the queen position. Enter Esther, chapter 2. So they make a rule, this new law, that says we need to find a new queen. Because in between chapter 1 and chapter 2, that big party that they were throwing in chapter 1 was a preparation because Persia was going to attack Greece. And this is a big deal. You got to get hyped up to attack Greece, because Greece was a really powerful nation. Have you seen the movie 300? No, because you shouldn't. Do you remember that one scene where... What? No, I don't know what you're talking about. So, I was in college. So there was do you remember when that king of Persia shows up? And it's such a weird movie, but he shows up and he's this massive king, and he shows up to Gerard Butler, and Gerard Butler is all shredded, and he's looking up at him like, we're going to take you down, we're Sparta. And this is that. This is the battle that's about to happen. So Persia thinks they're going to roll over Greece. Greece comes up and pushes them back. And so he lost the battle. All that hype, only to lose the battle. And after the night doesn't go how you expect, that next, look at chapter 2, verse 1. After these things, when the anger of the king Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had been decreed against her. He regretted what he did. And he's like, maybe when I was drunk, I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I shouldn't have said that about my wife. You may have known of someone who has done this before, and in the middle of a party life, to impress their friends, say something dumb to the person they actually care about, and now the person they care about is gone. They don't get to have that relationship anymore. All of his buddies, who were his advisors, realize if he brings that queen back and she finds out that we're the ones who came up with the idea of kicking her out, she's going to punish us. So they huddle together and they decide we should get him a new queen. So they say, King, how about this? Instead of looking for Vashti, we just find the prettiest girl in all the land and bring her in here for you. And he's like, that's a great plan. And so he sends out messengers into all of his lands to find the prettiest girls they could find. And whichever one pleases the king, it says in verse 4, and let the young woman who pleased the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in Susa, in verse 5, of the citadel, whose name was Mordecai. Now Mordecai, he was raising his uncle's daughter, so his cousin. Some people say Mordecai was Esther's uncle, some was his cousin. Anyways, Esther doesn't have a mom and dad. She's being raised by her older cousin, uncle, Mordecai. And he's doing a good job raising her, but her name, by the way, when you see Esther in heaven at some point, don't call her Esther, because that wasn't her original name. Her original name, verse 7, he was bringing up Hadassah. That is Esther, the daughter of his uncle. Her name is Hadassah. So what would happen is when they would take you captive, they would switch your name, because they don't want you to have a Jewish identity, an identity with your former nation. You are now Persian. By the way, this is what culture does. They try to shift your identity away from Christ, away from God, onto your new identity. This is who you are. And we constantly have to be reminding ourselves, no, I'm not Esther. I'm not Ishtar, the star, the god of the stars. I'm not that. I am Hadassah. Hadassah is myrtle. And a myrtle, it speaks in Isaiah of the myrtle that grows within the briars. It's a sign of the blessing of God. That's who she's intended to be. She's intended to be this myrtle that grows in the briars. Now, here's the thing. When Persia took Israel captive, there's all these, if you read about in Zechariah 2 and Isaiah 41, they were supposed to leave. They had, at the point that Esther comes around, God had freed the nation of Israel from Persia. He's like, you can go home now. The problem is they've been there for 70 years. If you show up to someplace in 1950 and you're told in 2020 you're allowed to leave, we've kind of settled in. You become integrated into that life. Mordecai had a political job. He's raising this daughter. I mean, yeah, we can go back to Jerusalem and live in a kibbutz and build the walls again, or we can stay here where I got a secure job. They were supposed to leave. About 50,000 Israelites left. Nearly 1 million did not. So when you find yourself in a place that you're not supposed to be, and you make that compromise of, I think God will understand. I mean, I got a job, I'm raising this girl, what am I going to do if I go back? When you make these compromises that you can justify in your own mind, you put yourself in a dangerous situation. This is where Esther and Mordecai are at. They shouldn't have been in Susa. They shouldn't have been in Persia, but they are. So they find out that Esther is, as it says in verse 7, the young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. So she's just a perfect candidate. And so now, because she's in a place she shouldn't be, she is called up to be part of the king's harem. And you don't get a choice in this. You aren't invited to be a part of it. You are commanded to be a part of it. They see that pretty girl. They say, you're now part of the crew. And they go through this year long. They prepare you for a year. It's 6 months of this oil treatment, 6 months of cosmetic treatment, so that for this one night, you get to present yourself before the king. And this is how it explains it in verse 12. Now when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, for 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months for spices and ointments. When the young woman went into the king this way, she was given whatever she desired to take from her harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in. In the morning she would return to the second harem. And then she would not go into the king again unless he called her. That's what it sounds like. If you go in to the king of Persia's house in the evening and you come out in the morning, you're doing the sort of things that you do with a king who calls in a beautiful girl's harem, all right? This is a compromise. When you're in a place that you shouldn't be, the compromise leads you to another compromise. You know, when Daniel was taken captive, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were taken captive, remember that? They didn't stand for stuff like this. They didn't try to hide their Jewishness. Mordecai told Esther, hey, don't tell everybody you're a Jew. That could go bad for you. They're trying to hide it. And Daniel was like, I'm not eating that food because God tells me not to. Give me vegetables. And he thrived in that. God isn't going to use Esther because of her faithfulness. He's going to use her in spite of her compromise, in spite of Mordecai's compromise. And so she has to go into the king. And it turns out the king, or Esther in verse 16, or verse 17, the king loved Esther more than all the women. She won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. It worked. Like she won favor in his eyes. This word favor is a very familiar Old Testament word. It is hesed, H-E-S-E-D. We have shirts out there that you can buy that say hesed on them. The loving kindness of God. God loves this with a faithfulness and a loving kindness that is uncomparable. Apparently, the king didn't just find pleasure in Esther, he actually loved her. This is what I'm saying. For a book that doesn't mention the name of God, you're going to start to see the movement of God and the sovereignty of God in all these moments. Kings don't fall in love with these women. He has hundreds of them. But this one he does. There is a faithful love that shows up in him. In the meantime, so she gets to be queen. Hooray, you won the harem competition, and now you are queen. So King Ahasuerus, Queen Esther, you did it. In the meantime, Mordecai. So we got this. We got the king, we got Esther, we got Mordecai. Mordecai finds out, he's sitting out the gate, and he finds out that two of the guys who are in charge of the king, like security detail, are going to try to kill him. And they're going to try to knife him in the back when he's not looking. He finds out, he gives word to Esther, Esther makes sure the king finds out about it, and the king has these two guys hanged. Good job, Mordecai. We're actually told in Jeremiah, it says, when you are taken captive for these 70 years, be a blessing to the nation you're at. Make that nation prosper. Have kids, find a job, be a blessing. This is what it looks like. He blesses, for the nation that had taken you captive, to make sure you save the king when there's an assassination plot, there's a faith there. And you would think that Mordecai would get rewarded for this. But rather than the next chapter of chapter 3 being, and so Mordecai was promoted, enter our next main character, the bad guy. The bad guy. His name is Haman. Chapter 3. After these things, like the things where Mordecai saved his life and Esther becomes queen, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. So Haman is second man. King Haman. That basically means king is actually in charge, Haman does all the work. So Haman's in charge. He loves this job. There's certain people, this isn't just true of men, but it tends to be portrayed, and certainly in this case, of men, who just love being in charge. And it's one thing to be good at being in charge, it's another thing to really love being in charge. And you may have had a boss before who really loved being in charge, and they're generally miserable people to work for. So, because they let you know how in charge they are. In this case, Haman's the kind of guy who, he made sure everybody knew, hey, when I come out there, everybody needs to bow to me. In case you didn't know I was in charge, I need to make sure that you know that I'm in charge. So when he walked through the city, he wanted everybody to bow. He shows up to Mordecai. Mordecai doesn't bow. And he's like, hey, what's that guy's deal? He asks his crew, his entourage, what's that guy's deal? He's not bowing to me. And they're like, well, he's a Jew. Well, that's not okay. He has to bow. And he goes to Mordecai, and he's like, I'm not bowing. Now, I would like to think, and honestly, before I did a lot of this study this week, I assumed it was because he was so faithful to God that he wouldn't bow before another leader. But customarily, there's no reason why he wouldn't bow. Like Daniel bowed before Nebuchadnezzar and said, long live King Nebuchadnezzar. There's not custom, that's a custom thing. It's not an allegiance thing. So, but it's also, I shouldn't have to bow to you. So simply put, I don't want to. But Haman would not have it. There's something about, if you've been around somebody who's super selfish and prideful, there's something about it that's like a black hole. And it doesn't matter if 999 people are bowing to me, that guy's not, and I can't do anything else. I have to make that guy bow. And if he's not, he's got to go. In fact, it's not enough if he goes, all of his people have to go. So he decides, I'm going to kill all the Jews. And he goes to the king, because this is going to be a hard sell, because like 1 million people. And he says, King, I would like to kill all of the Jews, because they believe things that aren't about you. And they have customs that aren't like you. And the king's like, that sounds like a good power play, but I don't know that that's the right move. And he says, what if, in order for you to pass this law, I pay you lots of money? It's like, I don't know if you've ever seen this in government before, where they pay government officials to get them to pass laws. It's a weird thing that used to happen. It's what happens here. And he says, I will pay you money to pass this law. And he's like, all right, well, yeah, you sold me. I'm good. And he passed the law. King put a signet ring in. All the Jews are going to die. It's just a matter of when. So Haman tries to figure out when. So he gets they cast lots. That's how you'd figure out what your gods are telling you to do. And he rolls the dice to find out, when should I kill all the Jews? And it's going to be a yes or no. So you roll the dice, and it comes up either a yes or a no. Should I do it? And the month that we're in this story is March. Should I kill them in April? No. May? No. June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January? No, 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 no. February? Yes. I have to wait 11 months? All right. That's what the gods say. Who's rolling those dice? God is sovereignly intervening on behalf of his chosen people to say, I'm going to give you as much time for this story to play out. Could he have done it in a month? Absolutely. But he's going to give the patience of time to let the story play out. 11 months later, they're going to have the chance. They hear about this. They send out an edict. By the end of chapter 3, they're sending out an edict saying, hey, by the way, just a heads up, you're all going to die in 11 months. That's the word of the country that is in charge of you. This throws the nation into verse 15, at the end of verse 15. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. That is probably an understatement. The citizens rise up when you tell them you're all going to die because of your race. So they rise up and there's confusion. It's hopeless. Mordecai is hopeless. So we start off in chapter 4. I don't know what to do. There's no hope. There's no voice of the people in a kingdom run by King Ahasuerus and Haman. And Haman's about to get his way. It's going to take 11 months, but whatever, I can deal. So Mordecai goes to Esther, and he says, we have to figure this out. This is the hopeless situation. And by the way, this is what happens when you've made the compromise to not do what God told you to do, and you are someplace that you never should have been to start out with. So how can God intervene? Yes, but it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better for them. He tells Esther, we got to figure this out. There has to be a way around this. And his solution is, he's going with an intermediary because he can't talk directly to Esther, so he keeps on going back and forth. So look at verse 11. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if a man or woman goes inside the king's inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death. Mordecai told Esther, you got to go talk to the king. And she's like, I can't just go talk to the king. I can be put to death just for showing up if he's in a bad mood. And so he accepted to the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. As for me, I haven't been called in to see him in 30 days. She's like, it's been a while. It's been a month since I've talked to him. I don't know what the deal is between us, but I can't just show up. That could go bad. And Mordecai says this. Mordecai, verse 13, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. He says, you don't get past this. And here's his advice. This is the most famous verse in the book of Esther. If you've heard a verse out of Esther, this is it. You'll recognize it when you hear it. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. He says, this is the whole reason you showed up. The whole reason all this has been setting up has been for this moment. This is your chance to step in and save the people. Here's what I love. Do you hear what he started with? He said, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. There's something about him that he knows, given our past, God isn't going to let us die. Deliverance will rise up. God's name isn't mentioned in here, but the fact that he speaks of deliverance means that there's a deliverer. So it's a very tight window. And he says, we're going to be saved. Whether or not you get to be a part of it is up to you. But this is your moment. And I just want to take a moment and just, we usually save all the application points to the end, but I'm going to drop it in the middle. So if you have a pen, you're going to want to write these down, because this is the moment that I think is most crucial for us, because everything that follows after this is a result of her willingness to step in. Her response to this, Esther told him to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews found in Susa, hold a fast on my behalf, do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young woman will fast also. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. And Mordecai did these things. She says, okay, I'll do it. If I die, I die. And there's this reality, but if I don't do it, I'm definitely going to die. So it's Paul's perspective in Philippians, to live as Christ, to die as gain. I'm going to die either way. So if I die, I get to go be with Christ. If I live, I get to have the opportunity to serve him right here. This is Esther's moment. So here's the first thing I want you to know. Number one, God is faithful to save his people. He will save those he has chosen to save. So I don't know if you ever felt this, like you go to share the gospel with somebody, you go to talk about Jesus, and you're like, I totally blew that. That person might not end up in heaven, and it's my fault. I should have been better at that. Yeah, take the pressure off yourself. This is God's job. It says in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. He is able to save. It's not our job. Our job is to do our job in that moment. But our job, we can't change people's hearts. That is God's. She knows that I can't make that king think one thing or the other, but I can go in and step into the moment. She hasn't been a particularly faithful person up to this point, but now she's like, will you fast and pray? And she has people who do. Number two, and this is the point I try to make whenever I talk to high school or college students especially. If you're older, you've probably realized this. The big moments in our lives they don't always feel like big moments. And there's just something that I feel like, especially if you're younger and you're expecting, we've seen so many movies and so many, video montages that lead to that one big deal where the music crescendos and it all happens in front of you. That's never how it goes. It's almost always, oh wait, is this happening right now? I'm not ready for this. Do I have to do it now? Okay, we're doing this. I remember when I got my call for my first job. I was right out of college, and it's that life-shifting moment. I was driving a U-Haul with my stuff from my apartment from one place to another, and I had to pull over to the side of the road because I saw it was Venice Middle School calling. I'm like, this is the result if I got the teaching job. And then it was, we just want to let you know you got the job. We'll be sending you a packet in the mail. You have any questions? I'm sitting on the side of the road in Orlando like, probably. I don't know. I didn't say that, but I'm like, no, I think we're okay. And then you got to pull back into traffic, did that just happen? I feel like that was a really big moment, but it didn't feel like a big moment. And that's kind of how it is for Esther. Do I have to do this now? I guess we're doing this now. Okay. And I just want you to take some of that pressure off yourself to make those big moments feel like big moments. Sometimes they're just, the magnitude is in the experience itself. Number 3, our king is stronger and more approachable. This king, you're worried that you're going to die if you show up. And I just couldn't read this without thinking about Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16, where it says, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. Please know, whatever your compromise has been to put you in this spot we're in now, that you feel like is inescapable, we have a God who is full of amazing grace. That's the song we sang at the end. He offers it right now. Not when you wiggle your way out of the compromising moments. In the middle of the compromise, you're like, I don't know how to get out. God, I need you. I need help. I don't know how to get out of this. We have a God who we don't have to approach hoping that he extends the scepter. Hebrews is telling you, he's already given you the grace. The gift is laying there. All you have to do is go receive it. You can't do anything to earn it, and you can't do anything to lose it. He's given it to you, and it's ours to take. And he loves us. He loves us. So, be encouraged. I think a lot of us have this kind of a picture of God that if I show up like I am, he will definitely not take me. And that's just not the case. He offers grace to you now. And number 4, you are in the place you are in for this time. We hear Tony talk about it all the time. You are where you are called. If you're trying to figure out what God's call is for your life, it's to be here in this moment right now. And this is a particularly heavy thing given all of the mess that exists in our culture. I mean, we have we have so much right now that feels like I should really know what I'm doing better than I do. Like that's kind of a consistent life situation when we're honest with ourselves. Like do you ever feel like that? Maybe it's just me. I should be better at this by now. And you stand there and you think, the number of times I've thought during this whole pandemic, I don't know how to lead ministry. Like the whole thing has been relational ministry where you get face to face with a student, with these young adults, and you start talking about how to do life. And now like you can't be face to face. So what are we supposed to do? And then somebody said early on, it's not a mistake that God has put you in a position of leadership in this moment. And I feel like what Esther's feeling, this is not a mistake. I have you here in this moment for this purpose. Step into it. And you know what he does? He's not going to give you the results. He'll give you this step. I want to know what's going to happen when I take this step. And he's like, I'm not giving that to you. I need you to be faithful to take this step. But if I go there, I don't know. Okay. And so you take the step. And this is what Esther has to do. If I perish, I perish. So what do? And by the way, can I just point out, school starts tomorrow, and there are a whole lot of very nervous to really terrified parents and kids. And I just want you to know you are here for such a time as this. And whether you're staying at home or your kids, your grandkids are going back to school, this is no mistake. And our job is to be salt and light in those moments, to represent a God of grace to a world that is so scared. Because what if something happens? What if you have no hope and you're going into a situation that you think, my health is the only thing I have control of? What if my health goes away? I don't know what happens on the other side of this. And we get to be the ones who say, I know what happens on the other side of this. There's hope. And this might be such a time as this that we get, where in those moments, and if you're a student, you have the opportunity to do that for your teacher, because your teacher are people, by the way. I feel like I keep on needing to say that. But they're people who need to know that maybe this 16-year-old is right. Maybe there is hope. I just want you to know this is a very unique moment heading into tomorrow. And my own kids, I got one starting high school, one starting middle school, and one going into third grade. And it's a huge transition year. And that's been my prayer for them, is that they can be, what if they go in showing the fruits of the Spirit, right? What if they go in being joy to a people that are scared? To students and classmates, administration and teachers. There can be something's different about that. So, for such a time as this, how does Esther handle it? Watch how this story unfolds. She shows up and she enters into the king's chambers, and he sees her, and he extends his scepter towards her. And in verse 3 the king, of chapter 5, and the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even up to half my kingdom." Now, part of preparation is planning. So you pray, and then you strategize, all right? And she had a strategy that was so good. She says, "Will you come to a feast I've set out for you?" Now, for a guy who just had a 6-month feast not too long ago, and then a week long, it's an easy yes. Like, you want to set them, like, if you've been in sales, you want to get them to start saying yes. Okay, yeah, wait, that's why you showed up here? Like, you risked your life to invite me to dinner? Yeah, absolutely. And you're making it? Yeah, I'll be there. So it's an easy yes for the king. And he shows up, and the first night at dinner, "What can I do for you?" Now, listen, there's 2 ways to interpret how she handles this, because she says, "I would like to invite you and your servant Haman to dinner." Now, listen, nobody knows that she's Jewish, so there's no angle here that it appears. But I would like to invite you and Haman to dinner. They show up, and he says, she says, "Would you like to come to another dinner?" She probably should have just said the thing she meant to say that night. So it's hard to tell if she chickened out or if this was strategy. But God's timing is in all of it. So he says, "Another dinner?" Yeah, of course. And so, what does he have to do? Nothing. He's the king, but he's got people working for him. So Haman leaves this first dinner, right? He leaves his dinner. And who does he run into right after dinner? He just had dinner with the king and queen. Everybody's bowed down to him, but he can't take it that Mordecai still won't. So Mordecai won't bow down to him, and he's losing his mind. He goes home and tells his wife, had this great dinner with the king and queen, and then you know what happened? Mordecai still won't bow. And in case you were wondering, I deserve to be bowed down to. Look at verse 11 to 12. The whole thing is Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions which the king had honored him, and how he advanced him above all the kings and the servants. Even Queen Esther, let no one but me come to dinner. Like, okay, we get it. If you're that kind of guy in one area, you're probably that kind of guy in all areas. So his wife, he's like, then why don't you just kill Mordecai? Like, I don't know what to tell you. He's like, that's a great idea. And she said, you know what, make it a really big deal. Make gallows that are 75 feet high, and then hang him on it, and then go enjoy your dinner. Very weird conversation. And they go to, and so he's like, that's a wonderful idea. Look at how chapter 5 ends. This idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. Like, what a wonderful idea. I'll kill him in the morning, and then I'll go to dinner. Fantastic. And now, the king. It's hopeless, right? Like, the only chance she had of saving the Jews, and specifically her stepdad, was in this moment. And now, she's not even going to be able to get to the dinner the next night because Mordecai is going to be killed in the morning. It's getting more and more hopeless. But it just so happens, and this is where you watch the sovereignty of God dive in. It just so happens that on that night, in verse 1 of chapter 6, the king could not sleep. It just so happens that he asked for a book to be read to him because they didn't have Instagram to scroll and they didn't have Netflix to turn on and other distractions. Hey, bring me that book. What had happened is, when Mordecai had saved his life early on in chapter 2, they wrote it down. Like, that's an interesting story. We should write down in the Chronicles. It's the book of cool things that happened to the king. Hey, bring that book of the cool things that have happened to me over the years and read me something good. It just so happens that he can't sleep. It just so happens that he asked for this book. It just so happens that the page they open up to is the story about Mordecai. And it just so happens that he's in such a demeanor that he says, have we done anything for that guy? Because that's a good story. I didn't even know about that. I don't remember that happening. We should do something to honor that guy. What are the chances of that? 0. The night before Mordecai is about to be killed. And so he's up, you know, it's that time you wake up at 3 a.m. and you're just scrolling. All of a sudden you start to see the sun comes up. The sun comes up. Haman's there first thing. He enters into the court. King says, who do I hear in the court? And they said, oh, it's your servant Haman. He's like, perfect, bring him in. Haman's there to see if he has permission to kill Mordecai. Haman's about to come in to hear the king ask him, hey, what should I do for the man who honors me? Haman says, who else is he going to honor more than me? So he aims high. He aims high. And he says, verse 5. Verse 6. So Haman came in, the king said, and what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? Haman said to himself, who would the king delight to honor more than me? Haman said to the king, well, here's what I would do. Verse 8, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, the horse that the king is ridden on, and whose head the royal crown is set. Let the robes of the horse be handed over to the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor. Let them lead him on a horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. He's thinking, this is the best. Okay, so not only did I get to eat dinner with the king and queen last night, I get to have dinner with them again tonight. I get to kill my nemesis this morning, but before I get to do that, I get to plan my own parade. Yes. Yes. This day does not get any better. They say bad guys don't win, and I am winning in all of the most important ways. Until the sovereignty of God drops in, and he hears the king say these words, and I just desperately want to see what happens to his face, because the face I picture in my head is that mustachioed principal from Ferris Bueller's Day Off who just can't take it that he keeps on being bested by a high schooler. The king says to Haman, great idea. Hurry, take the robes and the horse as you have said, and do all those things to Mordecai the Jew. I'm sorry, what? You're going to do all this to who? And he's like, who sits at the king's gate? I don't know if you know Mordecai. He's in front of the gate all the time. That's the guy I'm talking about. Like, yeah, I know. And he drives it home further. And leave out nothing that you have mentioned. Make sure you do all that stuff you said to him. And then he does. So Haman took the robes and the horse. Like, you can't not do what the king said. He does all these things to him. And then verse 12, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman returned to his house mourning with his head covered. He is so sad because how could I have had to do that? I hate this so much. He goes and talks to his wife again, the one who said you should just kill him. And now she says to him, in verse 13 of chapter 6, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you won't overcome him. You will surely fall before him. That's the least encouraging thing you can say. But again, if you're that kind of guy politically, you're probably that kind of guy to your wife, and she's like, yeah, that makes sense. What do you mean begun to fall, by the way? It sounds like this isn't the end of it. Now listen, that was bad. This is the beginning of the day. The first thing he has to do during the day that he was planning on being awesome was celebrate Mordecai. But you know what? I get to go to dinner. While he's having conversation with his wife, verse 14, while they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. Great. I get to go to dinner. That was a mess, but this will be great. And just watch how this unfolds. So, on the second day, as they were drinking wine and feast, the king said again to Queen Esther, what is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Even up to half my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. And she says, this time she doesn't hesitate. She says, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. And he's thinking, you make it sound like somebody's after you. And Haman's thinking, that's weird. Who will be after the queen? For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our afflictions not to be compared to the king. So this is the point where Haman's like, wait, you and your people, the only people I know of that are being annihilated is the Jews. Wait a minute. Is that my fault now? Is it my fault? Oh, he's starting to put the puzzle pieces together, especially when the king says, then King Ahasuerus says to the Queen Esther in verse 5, who is he and where is he who has dared to do this? Oh no. And Esther said, and she doesn't hesitate, the boldness that she needed before comes through now because the timing of God is perfect in his sovereignty. Esther said, a foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman. And again, I don't know how else you put this, but this feels like an understatement. Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. Haman soils himself. This is the moment of, oh no. This is my fault. This day just gets worse. And it's about to get even worse. You're like, how does it get worse than the king of Persia thinking that you tried to kill his wife? Watch. The king arose from his wrath and wine drinking and went into the palace garden, but Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther. For he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. Yeah, I suppose. And I think this is for two reasons. One thing was, this was the king's guy. He wasn't worried. He had trusted everything to Haman. So there wasn't reason to be necessarily concerned about him. But now you've threatened my wife. And also, that's an edict. I can't just back out. Even the king can't back out from his own edict that he passed, this law that he passed. So he goes into the palace thinking, what am I going to do? My wife is going to die. All these people are going to die, and it's his fault. So he comes back in, and when he comes back in, remember, Haman was begging for his life. Verse 8, the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. So he's begging, aggressively begging. Esther's on the couch dude, you got this in your situation yourself. And he falls on the couch saying, oh no, please save me. All the king sees when he walks in is this guy falling on the couch where his wife is. And he says, will you even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house? And he's like, no, this is not what I was doing. But he doesn't get the chance to say that. As the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. They put a sack over his head. And that's the last thing he sees is him begging for his life in front of Esther. Because then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in the attendants of the king, says, again, if you're that kind of guy who has been wicked in your leadership, everybody is kind of happy to see you fall. So even this random Harbona the eunuch says, moreover, the gallows that Haman prepared for Mordecai, you know who saved the life of the king? A little jab to the guy who has a sack over his head. The last thing he's going to hear is, wait, the guy I hated did that to him? It just gets worse. It's like watching, you ever see those old videos like Mike Tyson fighting somebody who clearly had no business being in the ring with Mike Tyson? And he like punches them, and then as they're falling, he's still hitting them. You're like, dude, he's already knocked out. You don't need to keep on swinging. But he's just, the hits go after the hits go after the hits. That's what it feels like watching this. The hopelessness that lays on Haman. And Harbona says, the one whose word saved the king, those gallows are standing at Haman's house. That guy's house. There's gallows set up. If you just want to do it now, they're 50 cubits high. You can make a whole deal of it. And verse 10, the king said, hang him on that. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, and the wrath of the king abated. And this is the sovereignty of God. He steps in, and you think, that morning, like this all happened in a day, that morning, Haman could not have been in a better place. And by the end of the day, he's dead because of all the things that he thought he was successful at. God beat him with his own sword. Like, it's watching David cut Goliath's head off with his own sword. It's that moment where, like, Pharaoh gets crushed by the sea that he chose to go into. It's Jesus conquering death by using the tool of death to kill death. It's saying, I am so much better at vengeance than all of you. Have you ever thought to yourself, that person needs to get theirs? You're probably right. It just doesn't need to be you who gives the vengeance, all right? There's a whole lot that's broken about this culture and society and our personal relationships. Please know what Romans 12 talks about, the last half. Read the last half of Romans 12. It's not our job to take vengeance. It's to love our enemies and to let God do that work. Because all Mordecai could have pulled off is like a good sucker punch at Mordecai in the street. God arranges the most elaborate vengeance that you could ever hope for. The only problem is the way this story ends, the last 3 chapters are, there's still an edict out there, a law that says all the Jews have to die. The king says, Esther, you move into Haman's house. So Haman's house isn't even his house anymore, it's Esther's house. Mordecai, you take Haman's job. Mordecai gets Haman's job, second in command of the whole place. Mordecai, write the law to get ourselves out of this mess. He writes a law that says you can fight back. Like, we can't take away the previous law that says you all have to die, but we can write a law saying you're all allowed to fight back, and we'll equip you to fight back. Israel fights off 75,000 Persians. They get this great victory. And then at the end of the book, Esther says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to celebrate the salvation of the Jews every year on a feast called Purim. You know what it means to cast lots? That word cast lots is called pur, P-U-R. And they said, every year we're going to celebrate these 2 days that we had victory over our enemies because God arranged it with a feast called Purim, making fun of the fact that the lots that Haman cast to kill us represented the day in which we would have victory over our enemies. And this is how it works. The problem is most of us are living somewhere in that messy moment of, I don't know how this is going to work out. And that's a real moment. But be assured that the salvation is coming. Maybe on this side of heaven, maybe on the heaven side. But be assured that it's coming. We have a God who is faithful. And he wasn't just faithful to Esther, he was faithful on the cross. And if he's faithful on the cross, he will be faithful now. So it doesn't mean your situation is going to turn out exactly how you hope, but the situation will turn out for your salvation and for the glory of God. I encourage you, there's so much more to this story, but dig into it, and just when you start looking for God in these stories, you start to see him everywhere, and you can be assured that the same God who is over this is the same God who's over me And whether it's this side or that side, it's going to be okay because God is sovereign and he uses broken people to do great things. And you can be assured. Father, thank you. Thank you that you are good. Thank you for this. This is your story, God. Esther and Mordecai, these were real people who had compromised to put themselves in the situation, and you chose to save them anyways. We are thankful. Help us to see your movement in all the stuff of life and to be faithful when you call us to step into that moment because you are sovereign and you choose to use broken people like us to do great things. Amen. Amen.